The mistake most men make after a breakup is thinking silence means it is over for good. In a lot of cases, it is not. If you stop chasing, stop pleading, stop trying to force the relationship back together, there is a very real chance that your ex will eventually reach out on her own. It may start small, a like on a story, a random, "How have you been?" A message that looks casual but clearly is not casual. Sometimes she will be more direct and tell you she misses you. And when a man does absolutely nothing after the breakup, when he does not push, does not beg, does not try to reopen the door himself, very often the woman ends up sending the first signal. For many people, that pattern is more common than they realize. Why does that happen? Part of it comes down to how separation affects the mind and body. There have been studies suggesting that certain bonding-related chemicals, especially things associated with attachment and reward, can increase during separation. Researchers observed couples who were temporarily apart and unable to communicate, and after only a few days, the emotional intensity often rose rather than faded. Then after a week, that effect could become even stronger. Distance can create longing. Lack of access can make someone feel the connection more acutely. That is not just poetry. In many cases, it is chemistry. But here is the part people miss. In a normal temporary separation, a week may be enough to spark missing someone. In a breakup, especially when the woman left or emotionally checked out first, that is usually not enough. If her feelings went cold before the relationship ended, the process tends to take longer. Often it is not 7 days, it is several weeks. Sometimes it is a month or more. Still, sooner or later, there can come a moment when the reality hits her in a different way. She realizes you are actually gone. She no longer knows what you are doing, who you are with, what your life looks like now, whether she still has any influence over you at all, and that is when the emotional machinery can start turning again. Once that starts, memory becomes selective. She is not sitting there replaying every argument in perfect balance. More often, her mind begins pulling forward the scenes that feel warm, safe, familiar, exciting. The late-night talks, the jokes only the two of you understood, the movie nights, the routines that once felt ordinary but now seem charged with meaning. The emotional mind rarely makes a fair documentary. It makes a highlight reel. And when that reel starts playing, nostalgia begins doing what nostalgia always does. It edits reality. It softens edges. It gives old moments a glow they did not even have in real time. That is usually when curiosity starts showing up. Quietly at first, she checks your page. She notices whether you posted. She looks for clues without making it obvious. She might ask mutual friends how you are doing. She might pretend it is casual. It usually is not. Underneath it, the emotional state can start to resemble early-stage infatuation again. The body reacts, the mind amplifies. Missing you creates longing. Longing strengthens the memories, and the memories increase the emotional pull. It becomes a loop. One feeling feeds the next. And once someone gets caught in that loop, reaching out can feel less like a choice and more like a release valve. A message is not always about love. Sometimes it is about relief. She wants to hear your voice, get a reply, feel that the line between you still exists, prove to herself that she can still affect you in some way. That matters more than most men understand. A response from you can calm the internal tension she is feeling. Without that response, the mind can spiral. This is one reason unreturned affection makes people behave irrationally. They are not only dealing with thoughts, they are dealing with a flooded emotional system. In those moments, the intensity can be stronger than what many people even felt during the actual relationship. And yes, this can happen even if she was the one who lost feelings and walked away. A lot of men get stuck on that point. They think, she stopped loving me, so none of this applies. But what people call falling out of love is often not as simple as it sounds. Very often it means the relationship stopped creating the emotional responses that once made it feel alive. The spark went flat. The chemistry quieted down. The familiar stopped feeling exciting. But when distance reintroduces uncertainty, scarcity, and emotional risk, the dormant reaction can wake back up. Sometimes all it takes is time plus absence for old feelings to come back wearing a new face. The dangerous part is that nostalgia does not only affect her, it affects you too. Every man knows this feeling if he is honest. On one day, you think about your ex and see her clearly, flaws and all. On another day, usually when you are lonely or emotionally open, that same woman appears in memory like she was perfect, softer, brighter, more beautiful than she really was, more understanding than she really was, more special than the actual relationship justified. That is the trick of nostalgia. It does not always bring back the truth. It brings back the emotionally edited version. And if you are not careful, you can fall in love again with the memory, not the person. That is why so many men get confused when they finally hear from an ex and assume it means the relationship is truly coming back. They think the contact proves lasting desire. Often it only proves temporary emotional activation. I hear versions of the same story again and again. A man says, "She texted me first, sounded warm, we started talking, then she disappeared." Or, "We agreed to meet, everything felt great, then she pulled back." He thinks her behavior makes no sense, but from the emotional perspective, it makes perfect sense. She got the response. She felt the relief. The tension dropped. The emotional urgency faded. And once the intensity went down, so did the drive. I remember a case like this very clearly. A man had been ignoring the woman who left him. She sent a few small attempts to reconnect, and then suddenly she told him she was in the hospital and asked him to come see her. He came to me asking what he should do, and I already had a strong suspicion about how the whole thing would end. But I also knew that once someone is emotionally hooked, giving them a technical explanation rarely changes what they choose. So I told him to do what he believed was right, but to be honest with himself about the consequences and not build fantasies if he decided to go. He went. They had a great time. He came back feeling hopeful. He said the connection was there. The energy was there. Things felt natural again. Her health situation turned out not to be serious. Then after 2 or 3 more meetings, she began declining invitations. A few days later, she admitted that whatever she had felt had faded again. To him, it looked cruel or irrational. To me, it followed the same pattern almost step by step. The reunion did not create a new stable bond. It simply discharged the emotional pressure that had built up during absence. Now some men hear this and immediately ask the opposite question. So should I always keep ignoring her and let that state intensify? Not necessarily. That is where people turn one idea into a religion and make mistakes. Emotional pressure can build when access is removed, yes. But not every situation should be manipulated that way, and not every person responds to distance the same way. There are cases where continued silence only creates damage, confusion, or unhealthy obsession. So no, this is not a magic formula. It is a pattern, and patterns still require judgment. Then comes another question. Does it ever end? Does a person ever completely burn out and stop feeling that old pull? In practical life, yes, people adapt. They move on. They build routines. They date others. They stop thinking about someone every day. But a buried attachment can remain much longer than people admit. Sometimes it sits under the surface for years, quiet, inactive, not gone. Which is exactly why you should be careful about who you ignore and why. With some people, it creates distance and clarity. With others, it creates a cycle that keeps reopening wounds instead of closing them. If your ex is only throwing out playful signals, little flirtations, vague check-ins, emotional breadcrumbs, that is not the same thing as genuine return. In many cases, that kind of energy burns hot and short, a few weeks at most. And if you immediately reward it with full access, full emotion, full reconciliation, do not be surprised if it collapses quickly. But if she comes back in a different way, if she initiates a serious conversation, wants to talk honestly, wants to repair, wants to explain, wants to take responsibility, that is a different category. The key is not whether she makes contact. The key is whether she demonstrates weight behind it. And there is no strict expiration date on when this mechanism can kick in. It might happen in 2 months. It might happen in 2 years. You can go a long time without speaking. You can assume she forgot you, moved on, filed you away as ancient history. Then out of nowhere, she feels the pull again and wants to reopen a door she once closed. That should not shock you. It happens more often than most people think. Old bonds do not always die on schedule. There is also a detail many men have experienced without fully understanding it. Some women keep exes nearby but not close. They do not return to them, but they do not fully release them either. They may answer a text once in a while, react to a story, leave the line half open, keep the person on social media, avoid complete disconnection. Why? Sometimes because total silence would allow emotional intensity to build too much. Small doses of contact can regulate that. A little interaction, a tiny reminder that the connection still exists, and the internal pressure drops. That is one reason friendship with an ex so often lives in this blurry, unresolved zone. It is not always friendship in the pure sense. Sometimes it is emotional management. And here is where I want to add a serious warning because this is the part people learn too late. Not every return means hope. Some returns are just part of a cycle. I went through something like that myself with one woman. There were repeated periods of distance. Then she would come back at the emotional high point. When she came back, the desire was intense. The pull was real. The chemistry felt undeniable. I tried to stay detached, but eventually I would get drawn back in. And every time, the same pattern unfolded. At first, everything felt alive again. Then the old problems came back. Then she disappeared. Then later, she resurfaced. Over and over, until I finally understood I was not witnessing love rebuilding itself. I was watching a loop. Some people are simply wired toward instability. They do not know how to live inside calm, steady, healthy connection. Drama is what makes the relationship feel real to them. Tension is what creates attraction. Distance is what makes them feel desire. Reassurance bores them. Peace empties them out. So they unconsciously create chaos, push away, suffer, return, apologize sincerely, reconnect intensely, and then once stability returns, the whole thing begins to feel dead again. That does not always mean they are evil. It does not even always mean they are lying. Sometimes they are genuinely sincere in each emotional phase, but sincerity does not make the pattern safe, so you have to understand what kind of woman you are dealing with. That matters more than the fact that she came back. A lot of men panic in that moment. They think, if I do not respond now, I will lose my only chance. But that fear can make you hand yourself back to the exact same cycle that broke you the first time. And the truth is simple, even if it hurts. If she vanishes for good because you did not immediately jump, then the conditions for a real return were probably never there in the first place. What was there was a wave, a craving, a spike, a moment, not a foundation. That is the part worth thinking about. Contact from an ex can feel like fate. It can feel like proof. It can feel like the story is finally correcting itself. But sometimes it is just chemistry knocking on your door wearing the mask of love. And if you do not know the difference, you will open that door to the same lesson again.